Chapter 1. 2 Tickets. I want to tell you something about Marco. He's rich, but he's a bad man. You're being stupid, Sylvia.
Gabriel had a kind face and intelligent brown eyes. He usually had a friendly smile, but there was no smile on his face today. He wasn't happy. I'd like to be as rich as Marco, he thought, but I'm only good old Gabriel. Sylvia likes me. I know she does. She thinks I'm kind and nice, but she thinks I'm boring too. Boring old Gabriel, that's me. Gabriel had 2 tickets for a film. There was a red rose on the table in his sitting room. He took the rose and the tickets and went out. An hour later, Gabriel arrived at the door of Sylvia's flat. When she opened the door, she didn't smile at him. "Oh, hello," she said. "What, Don't you remember, Sylvia?" said Gabriel. "It's Sunday evening. We're going to the cinema. I've got the tickets. It's that great new film. You said—" "What do you mean?" said Sylvia. "I can't go out with you this evening. I'm busy. I don't remember." "But I called you on Thursday," Gabriel said. "You wanted to come." Sylvia pushed her beautiful dark hair out of her eyes. She didn't look at Gabriel. "Oh dear," she said. "That was stupid of me. I'm really sorry. Please don't be angry, Gabriel. Come back tomorrow. We'll go to the film tomorrow." She began to shut the door. "Sylvia," Gabriel said angrily, "you're going out with Marco. I know you are. I want to tell you something about Marco. He's rich, but he's a bad man. You're being stupid, Sylvia."
Chapter 2. A Table for 2. Marco didn't know about the Delgados' money. He saw their pictures, their jewellery, and other expensive things, and he liked them all.
Marco stood at the door of Sylvia's flat and watched Gabriel leaving. He looked carefully at his clothes and his shoes. Why didn't Sylvia open the door? She was in there. Then, suddenly, it opened. "Sylvia, dear," Marco said, "you look wonderful." He stopped. Sylvia didn't look wonderful. Her face was red, and she looked unhappy. Gabriel said something to her, Marco thought. What was it? That young man doesn't like me, and I don't like him. He followed Sylvia into the sitting room. "I'm nearly ready," she said. "Have a drink. I'll come in a minute." Marco knew the Delgados' sitting room well. He went to the table and got a drink. Then he sat down in an expensive armchair. He liked the flat. There were beautiful pictures on the walls, and everything in the room looked very expensive. Sylvia lived with her mother. Her father was dead. Before he died, Mr. Delgado had a good job. He had cars and friends and a lot of money. But the Delgados weren't a rich family now, and Sylvia's mother was ill. The doctor often came and visited her. Sometimes Mrs. Delgado had to go to hospital. She had to have good food and expensive medicines. The Delgados didn't have much money now.
Chapter 3. Sylvia's Story. Suddenly, the lights went out, and it was nearly dark. Then, people started to scream. Sylvia didn't move. She couldn't move.
The ground moved under Sylvia's feet. Help! What is it? What's happening? She thought. There was a terrible noise, and she looked up into the sky. Perhaps the noise and the shaking came from a plane. Suddenly, the lights went out, and it was nearly dark. Then people started to scream. Sylvia didn't move. She couldn't move. It's an earthquake, she thought. Oh no, please no. The ground moved again. A long crack started to run up from the bottom of the wall in front of her to the top. Then the wall opened, and Sylvia could see the people inside the restaurant. They tried to run. Their screams were terrible. She could see hands pushing and pulling. She could see their faces and their eyes. They were terribly afraid. Then the wall fell, and the roof came down. Sylvia couldn't see the faces and hands now. The Oasis restaurant wasn't there. It was only rubble. Sylvia couldn't move. She couldn't scream. Marco's in there, she thought. Marco, and the manager, and those people, they... Oh, I can't... I don't... There was another loud noise behind her. Sylvia turned. Another building fell, and another, and another. Suddenly, she remembered her mother.
Chapter 4. Neighbours. Where's my mother? She's not in our flat. You know she can't walk. Did somebody take her? Who? Where did they go?
Sylvia sat down on her mother's bed and cried. Where is she? She thought. Who's with her? What can I do? She stood up. Her feet hurt, so she went to her bedroom for some better shoes. She started to take off her dress, but then she heard another loud noise. Another building fell. I can't stay here inside the building, she thought. It's too dangerous. She went quickly out of the flat and down into the street. Then she stopped. Where can I go? What can I do? She thought. First, she had to find her mother. After that... But no, she didn't want to think about Marco. He was in the ruins of the Oasis restaurant. And she couldn't think about Gabriel. Perhaps he was in the ruins of the Plaza Cinema. Suddenly, she saw a neighbour. The old man lived in the next building. She went to him and put her hand on his arm. Oh, Mr. Enrique, she said, you're safe. The old man didn't move. He didn't see or hear her. His face was white and his hands shook. He started to cry quietly. Sylvia shook his arm. Mr. Enrique, she said, it's me, Sylvia Delgado. Where's my mother? She's not in our flat. You know she can't walk. Did somebody take her? Who? Where did they go? The old man turned and looked at her.
Chapter 5. Gabriel's Story. Slowly, he started to walk. He felt terribly weak. His right arm hurt very badly, and his head, too. Sometimes he nearly fell.
At the time of the earthquake, Gabriel was outside the plaza. A lot of people wanted to buy their tickets, and they went inside. But he had his ticket. He was safe because he waited outside. Gabriel heard the first sounds of the earthquake, but he didn't see the buildings when they fell. He didn't hear the screams. Some rubble hit him on the head, and he fell to the ground. After a long time, he heard somebody. It was a woman. "Look at this young man," the woman said. "Is he dead?" "No," said another woman, "but he's hurt." I'm all right," said Gabriel. He tried to sit up. The women moved away. Gabriel's arm hurt terribly. He couldn't move it. It was broken. He sat in the street. Then he stood up slowly and looked round. It was nearly dark. Only the cars gave some light. "My family," he thought. "Mum, Dad." But they were a long way away in another town. He couldn't do anything for them. Then he thought of Sylvia. She was with Marco. He couldn't help her. But there was nobody with Mrs. Delgado, and she was ill. "I'll go back to the Delgado's flat," thought Gabriel. "I can help Mrs. Delgado, and perhaps I'll hear news of Sylvia."
Chapter 6. Liberty Park. We pulled him from the rubble, but did he say thank you? No, he didn't. He was only worried about his car.
Sylvia didn't like walking. She usually caught a bus or took a taxi. She was tired and her back hurt. But she didn't think about her back, or about the cuts on her feet. She was with a lot of other people. They all had the same idea. They wanted to leave the town and go into the country, away from the dangerous high buildings. A friendly woman talked to Sylvia. "Isn't anybody with you, dear?" she said. "Where's your family?" "There's only my mother," said Sylvia. "I think she's at Liberty Park. I'm going to look for her." "Don't worry, you'll find her," the woman said kindly. Sylvia felt better. "Did you see the Grand Hotel?" said a man. "It's a ruin. Hundreds of people were inside it." "It's terrible, terrible," his wife said. "I saw a baby." She stopped. "And the shopping centre," another woman said. "The shoe shop is all right, but the supermarket is a ruin." "The centre's bad," said a man. "But it's worse east of here. I was out there when the earthquake happened." "Near the station?" the kind woman asked. "No, near the Oasis restaurant," the man said. Sylvia started to listen more carefully. "The Oasis is a lovely place," somebody said. "Is it all right?" "No," the man said. "It's a ruin. A lot of people are dead. But the manager was all right. He was at the back of the restaurant. It was better there. He'll be all right. I wanted to help the other people, but I was worried about my family, so I came back into town. We're all safe. But our home—" He stopped talking. Sylvia turned to him. "Excuse me," she said. "There was a man in the restaurant. The manager was with him when the earthquake. Do you know? Is he all right?"
"Yes," said the man. "He's all right. I pulled him out. A tall, dark man. Is that him?"
"Yes," said Sylvia.
The man laughed. "Don't worry about him," he said. "He's fine. My friend and I worked hard. We pulled him from the rubble. But did he say thank you? No, he didn't. He was only worried about his car. He didn't help the other people under the rubble. He only had small cuts on his face and hands, but he wanted to see a doctor. Other people were dead, or nearly dead, but he wasn't interested in them. I'm sorry. Is he your friend? But really."
Chapter 7. Thieves. It was his red rose. It was there, in the same place, by the front door. A rose from another world, another life.
It was early in the morning when Gabriel arrived at the Delgados' flat. His arm hurt badly, and he was terribly thirsty. The street was quieter now. Most people were out in the country, or in the parks outside the town. But there were 4 or 5 men at work in the ruins of the building next door. They pulled the rubble away. Gabriel watched them for a minute. Suddenly, they stopped working and listened. "I can hear something," one man said. "Here! I think it's a child. Quick, come and help." Gabriel went to them. "I can help," he said. One of them looked up and smiled at him. "Don't be stupid," he said. "You've got to have 2 hands for this job. Go and sit down." Slowly, Gabriel went up the stairs to the Delgados' flat. The building was dangerous, but he didn't think about that. He could hear the cries of the child. He felt terrible. Then he felt something on the floor under his foot. He looked down. It was his red rose. It was there, in the same place, by the front door. A rose from another world, another life. The door of the flat was open. Gabriel called, "Mrs. Delgado? Sylvia, are you there?" There was no answer, but suddenly 2 men ran out of the sitting room. The first man went down the stairs before Gabriel could stop him. Then the other man ran past. Gabriel put out his foot, and the man fell over it. A box fell to the ground. The man didn't stop. He jumped up and ran away. Gabriel opened the box. There was jewellery inside it. "Mrs. Delgado's jewellery," he thought. "So, the thieves are busy now." He took the jewellery box into the flat. He looked round. The pictures were on the walls. Sylvia's camera was on the table. Good, he thought. The thieves didn't have much time. They only took the jewellery, and I've got it now. Then, near one of the armchairs, he saw Sylvia's dirty evening shoes. He thought for a minute. For the first time for hours, he smiled. She wore those shoes last night, he thought. So she came back here after the earthquake. She isn't dead. She came home and took her mother to a safe place. Oh, Sylvia, Sylvia, you're all right.
Chapter 8. Home. There was a man asleep in front of her door. He looked thin and ill. His face and clothes were dirty. And his arm, his head.
On the third day after the earthquake, good news came to Liberty Park. Mr. Garcia had a radio in his car. "Sylvia, come and listen," he called to her. "There will not be another earthquake," the newsreader said. "People can go back to their homes. Dangerous buildings have a white cross on the door. Do not go inside those buildings. Other buildings are safe. I will say that again." Mr. Garcia and Sylvia listened again. Then Mr. Garcia turned the radio off. "Do you think it's really safe?" Sylvia asked. "Do you think we can go home?" Mr. Garcia shook his head. "I don't know," he said, "but I know one thing. Your mother can't stay here. We'll take her home to her bed. You can look after her there." Everywhere in Liberty Park, people asked questions. Many people were worried. Was the newsreader right? They were afraid of another earthquake. They wanted to stay in the country for another day or two. But other people wanted to go home. They started to move into the streets. Sylvia sat down next to her mother. "We're going home, Mother," she said. Mr. Garcia carried Mrs. Delgado carefully to his car. She was as light as a child. Sylvia opened the back door of the car, and Mr. Garcia put Mrs. Delgado inside. The journey into town took a long time. There was rubble everywhere, and in some places there were trees across the road. Mr. and Mrs. Garcia sat in the front of the car and talked. They were worried about their flat, their friends, and their neighbours. Sylvia sat in the back with her mother and looked out of the window. But she didn't see the ruins, or the rubble, or the firemen. She didn't hear the Garcias.